Hello world and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. I'm Blaze Stewart, architect at Winterlight, and today we're going to be looking at how to use NFS on Azure File Storage. Hi guys, coming at you from on the road this week, so sorry for the less than stellar video quality. In any case, I wanted to look at NFS again. A few weeks ago, we looked at NFS from the perspective of NFS using blob storage, and it supported NFS v3. But a new feature went into public preview this week for NFS v4.1 on Azure Files. So NFS v3 worked for Azure Blob Storage, but this is NFS v4.1 on Azure Files. And so this opens up another possibility for using NFS in the context of file shares. And this is going to be more Linux native, and so it will work in Windows, and we'll look at how to do that in the video. But it is one of those things that allows you to have a much more native experience in NFS on Linux rather than using SNB, which isn't exactly a first-class citizen on Linux. So this has a lot of potential offerings that we could use Azure Files for, and a lot of different applications that use NFS instead of SNB, and they support that protocol will now be able to use Azure Files in addition to using blob storage as well, as we looked at a few weeks ago. So let's dive right in and look at how to set this all up, and we'll create a virtual machine that uses Linux, and we'll mount it there, and then we'll create some files, and then we'll look at it from the Windows perspective as well. So the first thing we need to do is enable the feature on our subscription. Now I'm going to use the Azure CLI to do this. You can enable features using PowerShell as well. I just like the Azure CLI because it'll work in PowerShell like I'm doing here, or work in Bash or in Cloud Shell, whichever you're using. And once you have the AZ CLI installed, you can simply do AZ features show, and then the name is allow NFS share, and then it's in the namespace Microsoft.storage, and the subscription ID is this. So you can get that from the portal or however it gets subscription IDs. And this will actually show you the status of your particular feature that you want to turn on. In this case, NFS shares on Azure File Storage. And this one is registered. It's a preview feature, so you have to do this for preview features. If you want to start the registration process, you can simply change show right here to register, and this will kick it off if you haven't done it already, and it will just launch the feature, and it will say registering right here. If it's not registered, if it is registered, it'll say registered. If it's not registered, it'll say unregistered. And if you want to just check the status, you can just run show again, and it will just show you the current state. So this typically takes about 15 minutes to do, so let it go through the process of registering the feature, and once that's done, then you can go to the Azure portal and create a storage account and start using this. Okay, I'm here in the Azure portal, and I want to create my NFS share right here. So to do that, I first need to create a storage account. I'm going to be using this VM and this VM down here to create a share between them using NFS. But before I can do that, I need to create my storage account. So let's walk through that procedure right here. I'm going to come down here to storage, and I'm going to search for storage account right here, and then create the resource. And then I need to walk through this wizard. Now I'm going to give it a name. Let's just call it Blaze Store for now, which it should be fine, or Blaze Files, whatever you want to call it. I need to pick a region that this is available in. I'm going to select East US, select Premium Tier, and then right here I'm going to select File Storage for my type. And this account only allows for Azure Files, which is fine. And I want to select local redundant storage right here rather than zone redundant storage. That's just more expensive, but currently this is ZRSs and LRSs only available for file storage in the premium tier. And let's click next. I'm going to create a private endpoint right here for now. The reason why is I want to create a network. We'll add in a private endpoint in a minute, but because NFS is inherently not a secure protocol from the perspective of authentication, you want to lock it down at the network level the best you can, because it relies on group IDs and UIDs inside of Linux, so user IDs and group IDs, to connect to the actual NFS share. it's not a very robust protocol from the perspective of having GIDs and UIDs outside of NFS. So those can be faked in some ways, and so it can open up the protocol to a lot of potential hacking attempts without that authentication. So let's just assume that that's going to be the case, and let's use a public endpoint with selected networks for now, and we'll create a private endpoint in a little bit. And let's go ahead and select this one, and that will only allow this VNet with this subnet to connect to this for now, and we can add a private endpoint after the fact too. I'm not going to have any data protection enabled for this because it's simply not available for NFS yet, because this is a preview feature, and I'm going to disable secure transfer because this is not enabled yet either for NFS. So once I have all of that done, I can just go ahead and create this storage account, and we can come back when that finishes. Okay, now this is created. I'm going to go to my resource, and here is my file sharing account that I have set up. Now, to set up a file share in this, just simply go to File Shares, or you can do it over here on the File Services. And then when you create a new file share into this, we're going to have a new highlighted option right here. It's going to be lit up. So I have SMB and NFS. So let's go ahead and create my NFS share. And I want to have a minimum capacity here, so I need at least 100 gigabytes for minimal capacity. It won't let you create anything smaller than that. So if I tried 50, it's going to say you can't do that. So let's do 100 as the minimum capacity, and then I'm going to select NFS. Now you can have root squash right here. Basically what that does is it makes sure that it will redirect the UID or the GID to a specific user ID or GID if the root attempts to connect to this as a root account. It will send it to the nobody account. That's typically what squashing does, and you can do that for root or you can do it for all. All squash will basically send everybody to the nobody account, which is like the highest number in the possible GID and the UID on a Linux context. Or you can just do no root squash, which should be fine for most people. Just select that and then click create. And once that's done, you can then wait for this to create. And that will only take a few seconds. So let's come back whenever that's finished. So now that I have my share set up, I wanted to provision my virtual machines to use this share. So I'm going to go back to the resource group and let's do my Linux virtual machine first. So here is my Linux virtual machine, and it's pretty much a brand new Ubuntu server. And I want to SSH into this guy. So I want to get his IP address. I'm going to simply copy this, and I'm going to come back down here to my shell, and I'm going to shell into him. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to do SSH into him. SSH. I need to type my username in, blaze at, and then IP address. And yes, I want to trust it. I'm going to punch in a password that I supplied when I created the VM, and I'm going to be shelled into him right here. So I'm connected to that VM on Azure. Now I'm going to connect to sudo right here, and I've got my shell right here. Now, what I can do here is I need to install some stuff. So I'm going to do apt-get install NFS common. NFS-common. Now this is going to install the appropriate client for NFS on this particular server, and yeah, it's a pretty small package, so it doesn't take very long to install. Now to connect this guy, once it's installed, it's pretty straightforward. In fact, it's going to give you it's going to show you how to do this inside of the portal. So if I come over here to my Linux VM right here, I can go over here. Not my Linux VM, back to my storage account, which is right here under Blaze Store. If I go into the share, it's going to give me some information about this. It'll actually give me the command to mount this. So actually, okay, it shows you that you need to install the package right there, NFS common, which I just did. And I can then do a make dir, the mount point right there. And I can actually just copy and paste it. That's fine. You can mount this anywhere really on the file system. It doesn't really matter. So as soon as this processes, we'll run the command. Now that everything's run there, I'm simply going to paste in the command right here, and that'll just make the mount point in mount Blaze Store NFS share. And if I go back to the portal, I can get the mount command right here. And this is going to have a couple of things that I can look at here. So there's the storage account endpoint or host name. it's going to be Blaze Store files core windows.net, and then this is the file share itself. There's the account name and there's the share name, and it's going to mount it at that particular space on my particular my file system there. So if I go to slash mentee slash Blaze Store slash NFS share, I can get into that. And currently there's no files here, but if I do, echo hello, and then put a file here, let's go hello.txt. I should have a file there, and I can cat that guy just to show you that there's something in it. And all right, I have a file now on my share, so let's go over to Windows and connect that guy, and I should be able to see that same file. I'm back here in my resource group. Now I want to go down here and select my virtual machine for Windows, which is going to allow me to have an RDP session with this guy. So this is a virtual machine on Azure, so I'm going to click on Connect RDP into this guy. It's basically going to download an RDP file. Click that, launch it, yes, and then I can put in a password for here. I'm going to select more choices, use a different user. I'm going to do whack blaze for the user, and then punch in the password, and click OK. And I should be able to connect right up to this guy. So to connect this one, the first thing I need to do is get logged in. Once it's logged in, I can then create the NFS client. So we'll get that going in just a second. Okay, I'm now logged into my virtual machine, and there's a couple of things I want to do to set this machine up to run. So let's go ahead and get the client for this. Now, to get the client, you need to go download a third-party NFS client for Windows. You can simply do that by pasting in the URL right here, which I'll put a link to in the video description here. And you can download the 64-bit client. If you need a 32-bit client, it's right here. You can get that as well. And you download the installer for the 64-bit client and run it once it's finished. And it will use a signed client. So this is a fairly old install, but it still gets the job done. And so once you install that, it's going to install a little executable here, and you'll need to reboot. But once you have that done, everything's good to go. And after you reboot, you can run it. So let's go ahead and reboot and then mount our drive up. Okay, I'm here in my VM, and I'm going to set up my NFS client on this guy because there isn't a built-in NFS client for NFS on Windows for 4.1. We need to use a third-party utility, and to do that, I can go to this URL right here, which I'll link in the description below. You can download the one that's for wherever the bit length of your OS is. So this is the 64-bit one. If you wanted the 32-bit one, you can simply go right here. But this one will take you back to the 64-bit client, and you can download this link right here. And it's just an exe. You can install it and reboot. And then after you reboot, you can come back into your client right here. I'm not going to go through that process. The next thing to do is mounting the drive. So then you need to pick through this particular command. So what you need to do is run the NFS mount command for this particular setup. And the critical thing to get right here is to have this -o parameter set. So you want to do -o sec equals sys. And that basically will bypass any kind of LDAP authentication or Kerberos authentication that you might have integrated with your NFS client. Now, NFS on Windows doesn't provide much more than just the kind of raw security that's provided by GIDs and UIDs in Unix or Linux, and so there isn't any integration with Active Directory as of yet. Maybe in the future there will be, but this is still a preview, so this is still kind of hackish to even get this to work. In any case, let's go ahead and run this command. The next thing that you'll need to make sure that you note, though, is that you have your host name set right for your storage account, which is going to be the storage account name right here, which mine is blazestore.files.core.windows.net, and then you can have Blaze Store, which is also the name of your storage account, and then NFS share, which is the name of the share that we created. So we can run this command inside of a command prompt. So we're going to pull this up here, and let's go ahead and drop it in here. I'm going to be mounting it on my R drive, which is that parameter right there. And so it's going to be mounted on R. So I should be able to pop open a Explorer window here and see my share on my R drive right here and be able to browse to this guy. There's that file I created on my Linux desktop, or Linux command shell there. And if I edit this guy, I should be able to edit him inside of Notepad. Um, so I mean, there's a lot of caveats with this. Again, this is a preview feature. The performance isn't exactly great. It does give you the ability to edit files, open and close them inside of this. I can simply say hello 123 here if I want to do that. Save this file as a text file. And if I go back over and then I can close out of this, of course, and then I can refresh the file list here. And that should show me both of my files now. Now that I have this set up on Windows, I have the share working in Windows under NFS4. I should be able to go back over to my Linux VM and see this up and running. So let's go flip over to that and see what happens if I can pull that up right here. Now, this is the folder right here. If I do an ls again, I can now see that I have hello123 set right there. And so if I do cat on that guy, 123.txt, it can show me that my text is indeed there. So you can see here I've got my file share in a Linux context and a Windows context. The Linux, of course, is going to be much better. It's much more native. Windows is a little bit kludgy. I hope that Microsoft will get an NFS client for version 4.1 soon. Currently, there's not one. So one more thing I want to look at in this, though, before we go, and that's to set up a private link setup. So let's go over to the Azure portal and I'll show you what that implies. Okay, I'm back here in the Azure portal now, and I want to add a private endpoint to this. Now, up to now, we've been using just a firewall rule that basically only allows us to connect this from selected network. So that's our virtual network. So this is technically a public endpoint, but it is firewalled in such a way that it will only allow me to connect my local VNet to that particular storage account. If I wanted to be able to connect this using something like a VPN and then connect to it over that VPN or an express route, I need to create a private endpoint. And this will allow me to write files to this over a private endpoint. So let's go ahead and add in a private endpoint here. And I want to put it in this resource group right here. And I want to give it an instance name. Let's call it Blazes endpoint or EP. That's just like that. Blaze EP or something, that's fine. I'm going to put it in the same region as my other resources. Now it's going to ask me which resource type I want to use. I need to go through this and find storage accounts right there. And then it's going to load in my storage accounts right here. That's the one I want to use. And then subtype of file. So that is the resource I'm going to bind for this particular one. And then it's going to ask me what VNets I want to use and subnet. So I'm going to use my standard VNet there and my subnet. And then I can do an integration with a given DNS zone right here. If I have one, it'll use it, which I already do in this particular resource group. If not, it'll create one. You don't have to do this. If you hit no, you just have to reference this by IP, but this will allow you to have a private link.core.windowsfile.net. It will alias it so that private DNS queries will resolve to this particular item right here. Otherwise, you can just use the IP address. In any case, the host name is not as important here, but you can just because remember when we mounted that, we actually put the storage account name as part of the piece that was after the slash. When we mounted that up, we saw that it was part of the slash right here. And so that is able to identify the storage account based on this part of the folder right here. Even if this is the IP address, that really won't change. It will just simply allow me to use this part of the folder path to tell me what part of the storage account it is. So it can resolve that even if you use the private link here, even if you don't have that. So that's optional. I'm just going to include it. So I'm going to say, sure, why not? And then I'm going to create my private endpoint and let this create, and we'll come back when it's done. Okay, my resource is deployed. Let's go to the endpoint, and this is just basically going to show me the endpoint right here, the private, the DNS, the FQDN, that kind of thing. And notice what it is doing here. It's going to resolve this blaze.file.core.windows.net to this private IP now, and that is the same FQDN that I used right here. So if I was to remount this, it would actually use that. But instead, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to mount the same drive using my IP address, my private IP address, and I'm just going to use a different drive letter now. And so let's run this. against that IP address that's a private IP address rather than a public IP address. And that should mount up on my Z drive here. So let's run that command and see what happens. Okay, now that that's run, let's go browse out to my new share, which again is going to be down here. And if I come down here to Z, I still have those same exact files that I saw when I was looking at my other instance here in my R drive. So you can see here that I'm mounting it as a private IP address instead of a public IP address. And that's how you would want to set this up if you were going to be accessing this over a VPN or an express route. So that's it for today. We're going to be looking at this in another context in a future video where I'm going to revisit NFS from the perspective of Kubernetes, and we're going to be looking at how to use it with that.
If you like this content, please consider visiting us online at www.wintellect.com, and there you can find about services that Wintellect offers, including training and consulting services. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to get notifications when new content becomes available, and also comment down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheOneMule, and also follow Wintellect on Twitter at WintellectNow or at Wintellect. We are constantly posting things about Azure-related technologies and things related to software development. You can also reach us by email at consulting@wintellect.com. Until next time, thank you.